And now we can get going with the program. So tonight's presentation will be building a Bleriot XI with Fred Stadler. Fred, I think I would describe as an EAA volunteer par excellence. As you can see from his brief resume here, he's involved in a number of activities of this organization. If you've ever flown in to AirVenture, you'll be familiar with the NOTAM, which is quite an extensive document that is produced each year to make sure that everyone can arrive and depart the event safely. Well, Fred leads the team that reviews that on an annual basis, and there's a very valuable role he plays. As you can see, he's also gets involved in a number of different areas. I do want to pull out the Young Eagle pilot, because Fred is no ordinary Young Eagle pilot. I actually went to the website today just to refresh my memory on how many Young Eagles Fred has actually flown. He is the #1 Young Eagles pilot of all time and has flown more than 4,000 of the 1.6 million Young Eagles that have been flown since 1992. So I'm sure if we were all sitting in a room together, I would be hearing a round of applause for that. Thank you very much, Fred, for the enormous volunteer effort you put into Young Eagles alone. So, enough of me. I am going to hand over the PowerPoint here to Fred. And Fred, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Adam. What we're going to talk about, as Adam said, is the Bleriot XI project. And, of course, many of you may not really know what Bleriot is. So our plan is basically to go first through the history, tell you a little bit about Louis Bleriot himself, who Adam characterizes as the uber home builder. I think a lot of you who are home builders will recognize some of the travails that he went through in producing this wonderful airplane. We're going to talk about how he did it, a little bit about what got him there, then a little bit about what happened after he did this wonderful crossing, and then some lessons that Louis might have that were still applicable to home builders 100 years later. And then after you understand why the Bleriot is such an important airplane, why the museum needs one, we're going to take a look at our project, the Bleriot project that was produced right here with a lot of volunteer work during AirVenture. We're going to show you some construction photographs and tell you what the current status is, and also talk about what the future plans are for the Bleriot. So with that, let's tell you a little bit about it itself. Now, most people know about the channel crossing itself. That happened July 25th, 1909. Louis basically took this airplane that looked sort of like something out of the Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machine. He crossed the English Channel, won a 1,000-pound Daily Mail prize, and he basically created a worldwide sensation for aviation. It was very unsettling to the British, who had believed that their Navy would protect them from the world, and here this upstart Frenchman crashes this airplane on their shores, and I begin to realize, well, maybe they are a little bit more vulnerable than they thought. That's basically what the story is, and it's really an exciting story, the story of the channel crossing itself. It'd make a wonderful movie, but there's a lot more to it, and so really what I want to do is give you a little bit of a feeling of what happened before that channel crossing and what happened after the channel crossing. So let's talk a little bit about Louis himself. He was a home builder not that unlike a lot of home builders. He was well educated. He had an engineering degree. He started his own successful company. His company happened to be manufacturing headlights for automobiles. Back then, in the turn of the century, they were acetylene headlamps. He got married in 1901. He was considered a very eligible, promising young engineer. His wife actually paid quite a substantial dowry to marry Louis, and he started a family. But then, as has happened to so many folks in the past, the aviation bug hit Louis, and it hit very hard. He became fascinated with everything having to do with aviation. Now, of course, this was before powered flight, but there was lots of talk, lots of attempts going on. Needless to say, there was no EAA back then, but if there had been, Louis would have been a chapter president for sure. He was just involved with everything that had to do with aviation. There was this worldwide interest in powered flight. There had been rumors going across the channel, or across the Atlantic, about work that the Wright brothers and others were doing back then, and everybody wanted to have a little piece of the action. So Louis started just like many, many others at the same time. Like most, he was tantalized by bird flight. Looked at the birds and tried to develop something. He actually built several ornithopters. We only have some drawings of what he did. We know that they were powered by carbon dioxide gas engines. Needless to say, they weren't called the Bleriot I at the time because he had no idea there were going to be others, but in retrospect, that was really his first attempt at building a flying machine, was this unsuccessful ornithopter. 1902, he became involved in all the French aviation groups, and there were plenty. Of course, you have to remember the French were very involved in Zeppelins and balloons and other types of flying, but they were trying very hard, just as the rest of the world was, to be involved in powered flight as well. He had sort of a pivotal moment when he watched Gabriel Voisin test a float glider. Now, this was a glider that was built to be towed behind a motorboat. Basically, I think I have a picture of it here. This wasn't Voisin's. This was something that after Louis saw Voisin doing his glider, he said he had to be involved. So he decided to form a partnership with Voisin, said, I want you to change it a little bit. And this is the change thing that Voisin built for Louis, and it was considered the Bleriot II. Now notice there was no engine in this. This was a glider. It was intended to be towed by a motorboat. It took only 6 weeks to build this, and Voisin still had his own. And on the first day of the flight, Voisin's had some trouble. They decided to tow Louis' airplane up, and the throttle on the motorboat stuck open. And basically the whole thing, before it ever got airborne, it crashed. But Louis was not deterred. He said, tell you what, maybe design was a little wrong, and maybe we ought to put the engines right on the airplane. So 1905, 1906, he came up with a new design. Now Voisin wanted to, or Bleriot wanted to have completely circular wings. He says that ought to do the trick. Voisin convinced him to use these sort of ellipses instead. He had a 24 horsepower 8-cylinder engine and 2 tractor propellers you can see there in the front of the machine. Of course, now he didn't have to worry about the motorboat, but the weight of this 8-cylinder engine was just too much. They made a lot of taxiing tests on the water, and the Bleriot III just was incapable of flight. But Bleriot was definitely had the bug. He wanted to get going. So he said, let's try a different design. Instead of those ellipses, let's try this one, the new front wing, and we'll put twin engines on, more power. So this was the Bleriot IV. It weighed 950 pounds. This is what it looked like on the water. It wouldn't come unstuck from the water, so he said, let's put wheels on it. And this was a version of the Bleriot IV designed to operate off the land. You can imagine, there you see that was not actually Bleriot at this point running. That was one of his mechanics, and sometimes it was Voisin himself who was doing the running. But unfortunately, it was just a little too heavy. There's a lot of collaboration going on here, and of course they were aware that the Wrights were doing something over in the United States, and there was talk that the Wrights had flown. But nevertheless, all the various folks got together, and they decided to have sort of a flying exhibition. November 12th in 1906, there was an exhibition held in Paris. Louis brought out his Bleriot IV. He actually was just taxiing it, getting ready, getting it lined up with the wind, and the airplane hit a chuck hole in the ground, and the gear collapsed, and the airplane was destroyed, which was a little disturbing to him. He had taxied it and crashed it. But there was a Brazilian there, Alberto Santo Dumont, who brought his new model, the 14 bis, and that one actually flew. As you can see here, it was a huge airplane. It was a rear wing, front canard pusher. It actually had no particular control, so it also crashed. But as you can see, it got off the ground, and Bleriot was very taken by that. His efforts had not gotten off the ground. Here, this giant machine did. Bleriot decided to start over. Now, take a look at this 14 bis of Alberto Dumont. Large rear wing, pusher, front. You get a little idea where Bleriot's next design was coming from. This was his next effort. He again had a large rear wing, a front canard, a pusher prop, but he designed it much more small, again more bird-like. This was the Bleriot XI. This actually was the world's first flying monoplane. Everything else that was flying, including the Wright brothers, were biplanes at that point. But Louis really had the idea that a monoplane was something that he wanted to give an attempt to. Well, he made a few short hops with it. He actually did get off the ground for the first time with this particular design. But as would become a pattern, he had crashes after crashes after crashes after crashes. All of them he survived. Each time he crashed, he would tend to rebuild it just a little bit differently. This was the same airplane, the Bleriot V, what he called his first mod. Again, a pusher. Here he basically put a tractor propeller on the front. And then another modification of the same airplane, the Bleriot second mod. By this time, Louis had actually developed a remarkably good control system for the airplane. The problem was he didn't have a plane that really would fly well enough in order to be able to demonstrate the control system. 1907, yet another design. Now, you notice here that instead of a pusher, he decided to go with a tractor propeller. Again, there were a number of changes to this, the Bleriot VI, and he actually did have some longer hops with it. Sort of an interesting plane because he used weight shift for pitch control. The seat could actually push forward and backward, but of course it was rather tricky to do that on his own. At this point, Bleriot began flying his own plane. He decided that having other people fly it for him, he just didn't trust that they were really doing the right thing, so he began doing all of his own flights themselves, including all of the crashes. He made a number of refinements to the Bleriot V. Here was his first mod, second mod, and his Bleriot VI bis. And this actually achieved a longest hop of 265 meters. So Louis was beginning to get the hang of it. He was actually able to get up in the ground, off the ground. But September 17th, 1907, another crash completely destroyed the Bleriot VI. But like all the other airplanes, that was an opportunity for yet another design. And 1 month later, he was testing the Bleriot VII. He was able to produce these pretty quickly because they were basically wooden design, used whatever engine was available. You can see some wrinkling there on the side of the fuselage. That's because he had decided to use vellum paper covering for most of these. It was light and fairly quick in order to build. He did have success with this. He had flights of 150 meters, 200 meters, then 500 meters. Again, experimenting with engines. You see here's the Bleriot VII on the top with a 4-bladed propeller. Second mod had a 2-bladed propeller. Just trying whatever would work. Quite a variety of different designs. Then in 1907, another crash completely destroyed it. But once again, crashing one airplane meant you could build another, and he tried to improve it. You could see that Bleriot was beginning to hone in on what looks surprisingly modern, a tractor design, a monoplane. It was really unique to what he was doing. This was the Bleriot VIII. The Bleriot VIII had ailerons, an enclosed fuselage, and really fairly improved control system. Bleriot at this point had really developed the kind of controls that we consider standard on modern airplanes, with a lever controlling pitch and roll, and foot pedals controlling the rudder. There was the same airplane modified for some different versions, and as you can see, he actually was able to get up in the air. So he was making fair progress. Now, meanwhile, in the United States, as you know, the Wright brothers actually had done excellent work producing their first flight, but they were really trying to capitalize on it by using the patent system. And that wasn't working very well. So the Wright brothers decided at this point, the end of 1907, beginning of 1908, that they had to go public. People basically didn't believe that they had flown. And so they split up. Orville went with a number of trials in the Signal Corps in the United States, and Wilbur, who was considered the better pilot, came with his sister Catherine to Europe, and he began setting up shop in the rather famous racetrack in Le Mans in France to set up to do demonstrations in Europe. However, he had shipped over his Wright Model A, and it was substantially damaged in shipment to France. It took him about 6 weeks to make repairs to it. And then after he finally had it repaired, the weather deteriorated, and the French press became increasingly skeptical and eventually started ridiculing the Wrights and said, well, maybe it was just all a sham. Maybe they really couldn't fly at all. But there were the purists that came out week after week, and Louis Bleriot was one of them. He would come out numerous times to see whether the Wrights were ready to do a demonstration. Well, sure enough, on the funny date of 8/8/08, Wilbur Wright was ready and made his first flight for the crowd. It was a very short 1 minute 45-second flight, but it absolutely galvanized Bleriot because it demonstrated things that he had been unable to do. Bleriot had a great quote. He said, I would have waited 10 times as long to see what I have seen today. Monsieur Wright has us in his hands. And he also was reported to look at the design of the Wright Model A, which of course had wing warping, and he said, I'm going to use a warped wing. To hell with the aileron. So whereas Louis had ailerons on all his prior designs, after seeing the Wrights, that was it. He decided to go with wing warping. So he was making great progress on the airplane front, but as you can see, he had been putting all of his efforts into building airplanes, and the home front still had some problems. His airplanes were starting to fly, but he had, at this point, managed to spend his entire family fortune, including all of his wife's dowry. By this time, he had produced also 5 of his 6 children, and you can imagine his wife Alice was starting to say, Louis, you're really spending all of the family fortunes on airplanes. What are we going to do to feed the kids? Well, Louis decided what he needed to do is start selling airplanes. So instead of just doing them as experiments, he decided the next 2 airplanes were going to be airplanes that he would sell. In 1908, he produced 2 models, the Bleriot IX, the Bleriot X. Quite different designs, the Bleriot IX looking somewhat like things that he had, and the Bleriot X being a much larger biplane, even though he had a preference for monoplanes. I took them to a Paris exposition. Neither of these models ever sold, and neither of them were capable of flight, as it turns out. At this point, things were getting pretty desperate for Louis. Financial disaster was really there. He decided that he had no choice but to build 2 more airplanes, which he called his last chance monoplanes. He's quoted as saying, I couldn't do anything else. I had to keep going because like a gambler, I had to recover my losses. I had to fly. He had gotten to the point that he basically had some engines that he wanted to use and he couldn't pay for them. And so he built airplanes and really had no way of powering them, but yet the only way he could see his way out of financial troubles was to have a successful airplane. Well, at that point, just by good fortune, his wife happened to make literally a great catch. She was staying with some aviation enthusiasts, and there was a Haitian planter staying in the same building where Louis's wife was, and the planter's child fell from a second-story balcony, and Louis's wife Alice just happened to catch the child, and the planter was so grateful. He says, Mrs. Bleriot, you've saved my son. What can I possibly do to save you? Well, being a good pilot's wife as she was, she said, well, my husband really needs to get an airplane, and if you could see your way to help us. And the planter loaned them 25,000 francs, and that was what produced the engine that powered the Bleriot XI. So the Bleriot XI, which of course is so famous, was actually a design done substantially by Raymond Saulnier, although Louis Bleriot had a great deal to do with it. It was surprisingly modern in terms of being a tractor monoplane, partially enclosed fuselage, modern controls, as we say. It had crosswind gear. Initially, it had a 7-cylinder rep engine, but they decided it was a little too heavy. And this sort of impetuous Italian, Alessandro Anzani, came up and convinced Bleriot that he needed to use an Anzani engine, especially since he was considering flying across the channel. He had a great sales pitch for Louis, when he discovered that Louis was unable to swim. He says, you know, my engine, I will admit it's a little difficult to start, but once it starts, it'll keep running until it runs out of fuel. Well, that was a little bit of an exaggeration, but at any rate, that match was made, and with the money that Alice had produced, Louis was able to make this effort. There were other people trying to make the effort, but basically Louis was the first one to do it. That's usually where this story starts. People hear that, yep, Louis flew his design across the English Channel, sort of view it as an overnight success. Well, actually, there was 10 years of preparation for that flight, and it was a 37-minute flight that basically changed history. It became somewhat of a worldwide sensation. News spread across the world that this Frenchman had flown across the English Channel. So Louis, as he needed to, after the flight, decided to exploit that. He set up mass production. He created factories, a flight school, and in no short order, in the next couple of years, he built over 800 Bleriot XIs in his factories. It was a very fast production. He would quote a 4-day delivery. If you had enough francs and you showed up on a Monday, by Friday you would have a custom Bleriot. If you wanted a 2-place one, he'd make it a 2-place. Whatever kind of engine you wanted, he'd build it for you. And not only did he build 800 Bleriots, but Bleriots were built all around the world, including many in the United States, both licensed and unlicensed copies. And it really was by far and away the most successful airplane of the time. But of course that success also led to its downfall, because people were buying these airplanes like crazy, but really hadn't learned how to fly them in many cases. So one of the places that they were built was the United States. And you can imagine what it was like to be in the United States looking at your favorite magazine, Aero, and see an ad like this. It says, guaranteed to fly, $850 you can get an airplane. Or if you want it with an engine, $1,850. And there were a number of people that answered that ad for the American Supply House. That was one of the couple of companies that were building Bleriots in the United States. Of course, what they got usually was a box of parts that they tried to put together. Other home builders saw basically grainy newspaper photos of the Bleriot, used that as plans, and started pulling up fence pickets as raw materials and building things that looked like airplanes. Mercifully, most of them didn't fly. But among them were some very famous Americans. The Bleriot really was an important American airplane. One of them was Harriet Quimby. She was America's first licensed woman pilot. She also crossed the English Channel in the Bleriot XI. She became the first woman to do it in 1912. Very attractive lady, very charismatic. However, tragically, she was flying a 2-place Bleriot in Boston Harbor in an exhibition when she was killed. No one really knows exactly what happened, but it's believed that the passenger leaned forward in flight to tell her something, threw the airplane out of balance. The airplane pitched up. The passenger fell out of the airplane from more than 1,000 feet in the air. That further threw the airplane out of balance, and Harriet Quimby fell out of the airplane. They hadn't discovered that seatbelts would be a good thing to put in airplanes at that point. And the upshot was the Bleriot XI actually landed fairly safely on its own without the 2 occupants. So certainly didn't help the image of aviation in 1912. Another famous Bleriot pilot was Earl Ovington, who performed what's considered America's first airmail flight. It was a bit of a stunt flight for the Postmaster General in Garden City, New York. It was an American-made Queen Bleriot. Earl Ovington was a pilot who had been trained by Bleriot in Bleriot School in Pau, France, and he really preferred the French Bleriot 11 models to the American ones. But the only thing available to him was a Queen copy. He has a great quote where he says, "These American companies improve the planes they try to copy until they won't leave the ground. And if they do go up, they're poor flyers." But he certainly was a famous American aviator. And another one sort of typical of the American interest was a Kansas farmer. He yearned to fly, saw an ad like that, bought a Queen monoplane. Because it was painted silver, he decided to call it the Silver Wing. His first 13 flights all generated crashes. Every time the airplane crashed, he would rebuild it differently each time. But he did go on to success, and it probably contributed to his lifelong interest in monoplanes. You probably have heard of this particular farmer. His name was Clyde Vernon Cessna. And so his first airplane that he ever built was a Bleriot XI. So that'll give you a little sense of why Bleriot XIs were of importance. Let's take a little look at what we can sort of learn from Louis. What were the things that he certainly was a home builder through and through. What can we learn from his experience? Well, the first of all is persistence. A lesser man certainly would have been deterred by the amount of failures that were involved, but he stayed with it, and eventually it produced a success that we all know about 100 years ago, 100 years later. Certainly he collaborated a great deal. Again, as I said, he certainly would have been active in the EAA chapter. He learned from others, looked at other designs, tried to copy what was successful, but still innovate on his own. And not to be missed is the value of a supportive spouse. Here is Alice Bleriot standing next to her husband when he had just crashed on the one more time on the shores of England. And there actually is a lesson we can learn of survival. Louis actually had 32 very serious crashes that he personally was involved with. And a number of people asked him, well, how is it possible that in such a dangerous environment you can survive? And he has quite a quote that I think is appropriate. He says, "A man who keeps his head in an airplane accident is not likely to come much harm. What he must do is think only of himself and not the machine. I always throw myself on the wings of my machine when there is a mishap, and although this breaks the wing, it causes me to alight safely." And the fact is, even in this difficult environment of the turn of the century, he managed to survive, thrive, and live to the age of 64. Ultimately died of heart disease in August 1936. So one of the things that he gave us was the legacy of the control system, as I said, and also really the design of what we fly today. It much more looks like a Bleriot than it does like a Wright Flyer, even though the Wright's contribution was tremendous. So because of the importance of it, that was really the start of the idea of having a Bleriot 11 project. It was a gap in the EA Museum collection. It was an important part of aviation history and something that we didn't have. Now the original Bleriot model is in a museum in Paris. There have been a number of replicas built, but the EA Museum, really to have a complete sense of it, needed one. So it was planned that we would build one, have it for display, and maybe even some limited flights. But from the outset, we knew it was going to be a challenging project. There were no plans, original plans. Even though 800 were built in the factory, there's no factory records whatsoever. And for a variety of reasons, partly because it was made out of wood and partly because there were so many crashes, there are very few genuine Bleriots left. Like all projects, we really needed to build it at pretty minimum cost, and so we knew that was going to involve a multi-year, largely volunteer effort. And as it turns out, the Bleriot project was a good workshop project at AirVenture. The last 3 years, pieces of it were built. Hopefully many of you saw that. So let's go back quickly and review how that project was built. 2006 was really the time when we were getting started. We researched what was available. Obviously, we found a few original photographs. We visited the other replicas that were already available. And there were some sets of plans available, but calling them plans is really a bit of a stretch. The most useful were the last of these, called the Rosendahl plans. They actually were produced in a German car magazine, Der Motorwagen. The plans were of an unknown model, certainly unknown accuracy, drawn after the fact. We really don't know what they were plans of exactly, but it was some Bleriot 11. And just as a slight additional complication, of course, all the plans were drawn in German. But we used the Rosendahl plans to get started. A key thing was trading to get an authentic 1910 era 3-cylinder Anzani engine. Pierre Duval was very generous in trading for us for a genuine engine and also some authentic metal castings. And so just like all wood aircraft projects, we started out, built a nice strong empty table, looked at the plans and started building individual parts. That was what happened in 2007. It was a wood wing, so like all wood wings, the first thing you do is build a wing rig jig. And after you build the wing jig, you build a lot of ribs. And so all the ribs were built. Much of that work was done at the AirVenture workshop. Hopefully some of you got a chance to participate in that. And then as that was done, that began to be put together in a pretty classic fashion, except of course it's a pretty large wing. But this was, and the fuselage began to be roughed out on the table. And as would be, this work was done in the Weeks hangar. The parts started to take form. You begin to see in amongst the other projects at the Weeks hangar, the Bleriot was taking form. Now, at the same time that the airplane was being worked on, a parallel project was working on the Anzani engine itself. Of course, we got the Anzani engine. We're just excited to have it. First thing we did is disassemble it and sort of evaluate, well, what is it that we have here? Here's a picture of the pieces as it was taken apart. Even taking it apart was not too obvious. Needless to say, there are no manufacturer support for the Anzani engine, so it took a little while to find out really exactly what we had. Well, in evaluating the Anzani engine, we took a look at it and decided that the first thing, the good news is it's actually an authentic engine. It's a real engine. The parts are original, and also they were all from a single engine. Some other cases, people had found things had been put together from a lot of different engines. In this case, most of the major parts had a 12 stamped on them, which meant that they all were from a serial number 12 engine, and all fit together. So that was very exciting to us. Of course, the flip side is the bad news was it is authentic, and because it's authentic, that meant that most of the parts were rusted, many were broken, some were broken and rusted, and a lot of parts needed to be replaced. Interestingly enough, most of the damage that we found in the engine wasn't from operation or from a crash. It was basically from being disassembled by folks who just didn't understand the engine, didn't know how to disassemble it. Here's a look at the crankcase. This is what it looked like pretty much when we got it. You'll notice that there's some major damage in it. Also, the crankcase itself was cracked. But this was, fortunately, we were able to find assistance of folks that were capable of fixing it. A number of people were reluctant to work on something because it's such a rare engine. They didn't want to take a chance of causing any difficulty for it. Here's a picture of the flywheels and connecting rods. Surprisingly beefy flywheels. Of course, a 3-cylinder fan engine like that requires quite a hefty mass in order to keep it running anything approaching smoothly. You'll notice a lot of very heavy pitting on the propeller flange up in the top of the picture. That basically had to be rebuilt. It was just too severely pitted. And of course, as would be expected, the connecting rods were bent and needed to be repaired. Here's a little look at the valves cams. Again, this is a 3-cylinder engine, 3 separate cams to drive the exhaust valve pushrod for each. And sort of a surprise to me, I thought it was kind of neat. If you look at where I've highlighted there actually were rollers on the pushrods. Lycoming might like you to believe that roller tappets are some new invention, but here's a aircraft engine over 100 years old that had rollers on the pushrods where they operate on the cams. This is a look at the carburetor after we had cleaned it up. The carburetor was an absolute marvel of simplicity. There's the intake manifold up in the top and the pipes that go up to the 3 cylinders. I'm just pausing a little bit here to make sure that all of you are able to see this on your screen. Here's a breakout of the parts of the carburetor. Here's just a sort of look at the carburetor itself. You can see the float is on the right and the venturi mechanism on the left. Air updraft here, the air comes in from the bottom up through the top. Here's a little bit of an exploded view of it. That's the float and needle valve and the cap over on the right, all very simple mechanisms. This is actually the needle valve exploded a little bit. You can see how it has a couple of rockers there, and that O-ring is just there to hold it in position, and basically that keeps the level in the carburetor level. Of course, if you looked at this carburetor, you've noticed that there's one thing that's missing. This carburetor had no throttle, and we decided that was going to be rather awkward for use here, and we really need to come up with some sort of a throttle. Fortunately, we found a similar carburetor in the EAA museum collection that did have a throttle, and so we had a local craftsman copy the design of the throttle plate and made us a new throttle. So this is a picture here of the carburetor as it's now installed on the engine, and it has a homemade throttle on it. So the engine can be more controlled the way you'd expect for an aircraft engine. I'm just pausing to make sure you all get a picture on your screen. I can see a couple of you must have a little bit slower connection, so I'll just wait until you're getting that picture on. And here's a take a look at the push rods. Now you see 6 push rods here. Actually, there are only 3 push rods in the engine. You can quickly tell that the black pitted ones were the original ones, and the shiny ones were the replacements that were made here using the black ones as the original. Again, as I said, there's 1 push rod per cylinder. Since there's only a push rod that controls the exhaust valves, we'll see how that works just in a minute or two. Oh, here's a picture of the rocker arms and the rod ends. Also the rod ends there, we manufactured new ones. They were so severely pitted. And coming up, this is a picture of an assembled cylinder. You can see the new push rod on the right. It's a cam that drives it is back in the crankcase. The rocker arm here is controlling a, I'm highlighting here the exhaust valve. By the way, these the valves and the valve seats and piston rings all had to be replaced. But the single rocker arm, as I said, controls the exhaust valve. That's the exhaust port over on the left. Over on the right, that valve looks like something hits it, but actually it doesn't. That's it's called an atmospheric valve. That's a very weak spring, and what happens is when the piston descends, the vacuum in the cylinder is sufficient to open that valve and suck air in from the intake manifold. It's a simple system, but of course very finicky in order to keep that properly lubricated. A sticking valve there with just using that little weak spring would stop your intake mixture entirely. So that was something we really had to be very careful to make sure that that valve and valve seat were appropriate. And whereas we did get a wonderful donation of an engine, the engine did not have a magneto. So we had to come up with some sort of a magneto to spark it. What we discovered to our pleasure was that we could use a Kinner 5-cylinder magneto, even though it's a 3-cylinder engine, because the way the 3 cylinders are aligned. Here you see the leads off the magneto, and we basically blocked off the bottom 2. The 5-cylinder engine is just as if there were no cylinders down there, and the spacing of this particular magneto works just fine. The only real difference with this magneto and what was used originally on the Bleriot is that we had less spark adjustment than the original, about 22 degrees before top dead center to about 8 degrees after, but that was sufficient, at least for operating this particular engine. So Kinner Mag did it, and with all those put together, by 2008 we were ready to make a run at AirVenture. I should mention that the gorgeous propeller was hand carved by a wonderful EA volunteer, Jerry Thornhill. We really didn't know what the propeller should look like. We just looked at some pictures, and he did a great job of producing that. One other thing that's sort of unique to the Anzani, or actually engines of that system, is the oil system is a total loss oil system. There's no recirculation of the oil. WAGs like to say the oil goes from the oil tank to the cylinders and then directly to the pilot's clothing. So hopefully many of you saw that engine run at AirVenture 2008, 2009. It really has a distinctive sound, unlike anything else, a three-cylinder engine and those little short stacks. So we were pretty key at that point. We had a fuselage, we had an engine. We thought we were pretty close to being done, but like most home-built projects, it ended up there were a lot more details that we hadn't anticipated. 2008 also was a workshop project doing a lot of the assembly of the wings, and yeah, we felt pretty keyed, thought we were ready to go. In that next winter in 2009, the landing gear was built. It was appropriate in terms of having the crosswind gear, just like the original did. You can see how the landing gear pivots, and fairly evolved castings were involved in the putting it up and down. We did decide to go with the tail wheel, although some of the original Blerios had a tail skid instead of a tail wheel. Here's a picture of some further assembly going on at the Weeks hangar. You can see the airplane taking shape. Sort of a contradiction. This work in the winter being done. You can see the Bleriot wing there. You can see the classic high camber thin airfoil. It's sitting right behind the tail of EA's B-17, which is undergoing its winter maintenance. Quite a contrast to see the distinction in aircraft design from the years. But at this point, we started putting the control system in place. As I said, the Bleriot really has a fairly modern set of controls from the pilot's view, not modern in terms that it does use wing warping and not ailerons, but that silver, or rather the goldish thing is called a cloche, and that basically connects cables down to the bell crank on the bottom, which controls the wing warping. Also, you notice that we decided to go with an aluminum adjustable seat because we really had no idea what the weight and balance was going to be, and where we're going to have the pilot sit in order to have the appropriate balance. Here's a picture of master mechanic Gary Bittner, who led the project, checking the rigging. Needless to say, there are no FAA specifications for how to rig a wing-warped airplane. One of our great volunteers, Jim Ordahl, in the background is watching, seeing what's going on. And then at 2010, the workshop again was used to cover the Bleriot wings. We used a polyfiber system. Originally, of course, they had cotton. We really didn't know exactly how. We did apply the fabric on the bias. The feeling was that that was the best way to simulate to allow the wing warping. And then, of course, the thing after it was covered, we had to decide, well, okay, now that we've got it, what are we going to paint it like? And there was a lot of discussion of whether to make it look like the original channel crossing, but the decision was made. The most colorful one that we could think of was Earl Ovington's airplane. So we decided to use the photographs that we had of Earl Ovington's airplane, the first airmail pilot, and paint it to look like that. In researching that, we discovered that also meant we had to come up with a little model, Trieste, which he always had on his airplane, French for 13. 13 was Earl Ovington's lucky number, so we're still in the process of trying to find a French gendarme model. So if anybody happens to have a real handy 1900s gendarme model, that's part of the airplane that we still need. But the wings were painted to look like it. No vinyl letters involved in this process. Basically painted those large wings to look like Earl Ovington's. Fortunately, we had a good photograph that we were able to copy. We felt that it was going to be appropriate. And then, like any other project, a lot of time was spent in just all the finishing details, the fuselage, the controls. Interesting, if you take a look at that seat and seat support on the right, it looks like that's made out of wood, but that's still the same aluminum seat that was painted to make it look like wood, but still gives us the functionality of being able to adjust it for the weight and balance consideration. few more modern controls there in the front of the cockpit. You see the engine throttle and such, but no EFIS in this particular system. It's a pretty straightforward airplane. Finishing touches, it's absolutely a gorgeous airplane. This is an overhead view looking at the pilot's cockpit. Fuel tank in front, and then a quarter rear view to sort of show the overall look of the airplane. And then basically in October 2010, the airplane is moved to the EA Museum. If you come to the museum today, you can see this gorgeous airplane. It's production by EA staff and EA volunteers, and really is just gives you a nice sense, rounds out the history. So looking back at it, what did we sort of learn? What was different about this particular project? Well, one thing we made a decision early on is we were not going to attempt to do everything absolutely authentic. There's a bit of a mixture of original and modern techniques. This was how the fuselage was put together. The fuselage formers there, the verticals, actually are not held by any pegging or any gluing. They're just held by tension. This particular system you see with the metal U-bolts and nuts was a system that Louis Bleriot used. However, if you look closely, you notice that we used more modern Nycopress sleeves on the solid wire that was authentic. Originally, it would have been folded over and wired and soldered, and the Nycopress sleeves just seemed like a simpler solution. So that was one case of a modern technique. Another modern technique we learned when we went down and visited a Bleriot being built in Broadhead. Gary Carner showed us a neat way that he was making these vertical formers using a pretty clever jig and a drum sander, and that certainly saved a lot of time in producing those. So we didn't feel that we had to go back and do it with all hand tools. We did use some modern tools. Also, it involved some non-aviation parts sourcing, but that was appropriate. After all, aircraft spruce wasn't around in 1909 for Louis to use for his supplies. Things like finding appropriate wheels, those are actually harness racing sulky wheels, which turned out to be pretty appropriate. But we felt that was pretty appropriate because back then they would have sourced things from whatever was available in whatever kind of project. And as home builders, I'm sure you know you build some parts more than once, sometimes twice or three times. Well, we had some do-overs in this project also. One was a complete set of wing ribs. After we had built all the wing ribs, we learned through some more research that the wing ribs we had built were really appropriate for a different engine, a more powerful Gnome rotary engine, and we just didn't want to have something that was mismatched to the wonderful Anzani that we had, so we ended up having to rebuild all the wing ribs. So we have a lot of extra wing ribs that didn't get used. Also, this gorgeous propeller that we had, well, after we put it on the engine, we found out that the engine turned up a little too much RPM, 1,600 RPM, and 1,400 was about the desired RPM. A wooden propeller, there's no way to repitch it. We might have been able to shorten it, but to make it go slower, just we couldn't tack anything onto it. So fortunately, Jerry Thornhill graciously carved us another one. That one we put on the engine, it turned up just the right RPM. So even with all the best effort, sometimes it takes more than one shot to get something done. So looking at it just in general, a project synopsis, what we have is this plane is really probably a lot prettier than any Bleriot really was. I consider it quite a bit prettier than the original. This is a picture of Louis Bleriot and his Bleriot 11 just before he crossed the channel. There was a correspondent there who wrote, he said, "Seen close, it's not beautiful, being dirty and weather-beaten, but it looks businesslike." Well, comparing that on the right, this is what our Bleriot looks like. It's a little bit shinier and prettier right now, but after all, we have a little bit of an idealized view of the way things were in the past. We had to make a lot of guesses as to details. As I said, there were limited plans, and in many cases, you just had to speculate as to what might have been done back then. But we're pretty pleased with it. We think it's going to be a wonderful addition to the EA Museum. We hope you all come to the museum, either at AirVenture or sometime the rest of the year, and see it. And really the important next steps, that haven't taken place. We're hopeful as soon as the weather improves a little bit to actually run the engine on the fuselage. The engine's been run on a test stand. There's no reason to think it isn't going to work, but the fuselage is pretty flexible, so we want to see what it's going to do when it's on the fuselage. And then after that's done, we're really going to see whether it'll fly or not. It's certainly not intended for anything other than sort of straight line limited hops, but it's going to be kind of exciting. So stick around. I don't know whether hopefully by AirVenture we'll know, but watch the EA website. You can be certain that when it takes the next step, we're going to get some castor oil all over that beautiful airplane, and we're going to find out whether it leaves the ground or not. So that's pretty much what we had prepared for you. We're sort of anxious to see if there are any questions that you'd like to ask, either about the history or about the replica. We'd certainly be happy to entertain them.
Well, Fred, I've got a couple of questions that have come in. One here from Lorian is asking, do you have any information about what happened to Louis Bleriot? We got to a point where he was we'd run out of money, and Lorian's asking, did he end up a rich man or a poor man?
Well, he actually did do very well. It's rumored that he made a second fortune, and by the time he died, he had actually spent most of that. Of course, I don't view that as such a terrible failure. Actually, maybe it was good planning on his part. He managed to enjoy all of the money that he eventually made, and didn't leave any particularly to his heirs. Although he did have his grandson was involved in somewhat of a semi successful effort to replicate the Channel crossing 100 years later. So I know that his family is still around and revering his memory.
Well, we're a little bit light on questions, but they're flooding in now. This is good. Michelle is asking, why polyfiber and not original cotton? Wasn't the original covered with linen?
Oh, that's absolutely correct. We were, in a number of areas, we varied from the original materials. Sometimes it was by intent and sometimes it was by error. We actually had thought that the original fuselage was built with ash. We had some translation problem from the German, and then discovered that, well, maybe it would have been more appropriate to have been oak. The polyfiber is basically because we wanted something that was going to be able to stand up outside and last for several years. The cotton was gorgeous, but was going to involve being redone every year or two, because basically the cotton rotted. Never was a problem in the original, because none of the originals lasted more than 2 or 3 years. But we wanted something that people were going to enjoy in the museum for many years to come, and basically we're willing to make the trade-off. And also, Aircraft Spruce very generously donated the polyfiber. So just like all home builders, even EA has to bend a little bit to the practicality.
Another question on the covering from Brian. He's asking about the polyfiber system. He's saying, is it really transparent as it looks, or is that an illusion done with the paint coloring?
Oh, that's a great question. Also, it brings up something I didn't mention. No, that was actually a painted-on yellowing. Similarly, with the wood, we used a colored varnish to simulate the patina that it would have had over a number of years. We just didn't want it to look like shiny white wood. But it reminds me that there's really something unique about the way it's covered. You notice that the airfoils of that era were very, very thin, and they didn't lace on the airfoils the way we would on a fabric airplane today. What they actually used was caning, which was cut to half round, and then the half round caning was nailed onto the top of the ribs. And so we've replicated that accurately, so that we really were going more for an authentic look of the airplane, so that when somebody came to the museum, it would look as close as we could to what a project was. But we weren't attempting to actually use totally authentic materials. Anyway, while we're going through some of these questions, I'm going to also put up a few pictures that won't necessarily relate to them, but maybe it'll be something that'll be more interesting on your screen than just looking at a word.
Well, this one's not a question, but it's quite an interesting little observation from Neil Patton. He's saying that, interestingly, the British had to record that Bleriot arrived by yacht, as their customs form didn't have anything on it for arrival by air.
Absolutely true. Yes, that's. By the way, a lot of these. There are a number of wonderful sources. I would commend probably the best book about Bleriot is the Tom Crouch book. He did as part of his work at the Smithsonian Institution, and he has many wonderful other anecdotes, including that one in his book.
Yeah, Tom Crouch certainly is a great author. He wrote the Bishop's Boys, didn't he? The Wright brothers biography also. Here's a question from Paul, which asked who is going to fly the aeroplane. Are you going to fly it, Fred?
Well, it's certain that I will not. We really love to have a pilot who is preferably has a negative weight, but being light is not only authentic but also probably required. A number of changes. This probably is a heavier replica than the original was, and also we got the lighter engine. So there's been quite a look around, but there is a person that's been identified, but I have to tell you, probably being lightweight is the key attribute.
Yeah, I think I heard from some internal discussion that we were looking for someone that was maybe 140 pounds or less.
That's absolutely correct.
Which is a little bit hard to find here in Wisconsin, the land of cheese.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, we are told, I mean, there are a number of planes that have flown, is having extensive pilot experience may be a detriment because this airplane is so unlike other airplanes in terms of having relatively ineffective ailerons. It has no ailerons, but the roll control is largely done with a rudder, whereas a pilot is used to using the stick to control the roll. So somebody really, used to this vintage of airplane, and also somebody who's really light. That's pretty much what we're looking for.
Well, Neil Patton's making the observation, sounds like we need a lady pilot, and why not?
That would be delightful. That would be delightful. And also relatively authentic. But hopefully they'll have a better outcome. We're not planning to do anything other than a straight line sort of hops down the grass at Pioneer, at least at present.
Okay, wow, there's still lots of questions still coming in. Mark is asking, are photos of the build posted on the net?
There are some from the 2008 workshop, but sadly there really aren't that many others. However, I think we're going to see if we can't at least fix it up with a lot of photos of the resultant replica.
I think we do have a photo gallery up of the aeroplane. I think when we did the paint scheme, we put a photo gallery up a few weeks ago. And another resource that's on the net that I should draw everyone's attention to, if you go to the EAA video player and just do a text search on Anzani or Bleriot or something like that, you'll find a video of the engine running. If you haven't seen that, you'll find that. And I think there might even be a video of some of the volunteers in action on the project as well. Mm-hmm. Dave is asking, has the replica at Brodhead been finished and flown?
Not that I know of. Gary Carner down there was enormously helpful to us, and he's been up and has seen ours, but to the best of my knowledge, that has not. He also has a Anzani engine.
Okay, and on a similar line, Tom is asking, he's curious to know if there are any other Bleriots flying.
Oh, absolutely. There are quite a number of them of a considerably different level of authenticity. There are Bleriots that are flying with Lycoming 0320 engines. It's sort of, what are you really going to try to do? And of course, probably the most famous one is at Old Rhinebeck, and theirs is certainly very authentic. They have one with a Gnome rotary engine, which is really impressive. Not certain that they're going to be able to continue flying that there, but that is both authentic and delightful. And there's a real difference between one that was of the era and one which we've built, which is new.
Yeah, I've just to add to that, Fred, I with my Englishman background here, I know there is an original 1909 Bleriot flies at the Shuttleworth collection in England, and also I remember seeing at Sun and Fun a few years ago the Swedish gentleman Michael Carlson had a Bleriot that he was flying with a Gnome rotary engine, which was really amazing to me actually, because I don't know if you saw it, but I'd always imagined Bleriots being very sort of docile in their handling characteristics, and Michael Carlson was really banking that thing and making it perform in a way that I'd just never seen before.
Oh yes, when you look at these aircraft and how fragile they appear, and then you read that, you know, people were looping them, barrel rolls, I mean all sorts of aerobatics, generally without any seatbelt, and it is really rather astonishing.
Actually, a question for me. I did actually wonder in the presentation, does the EAA replica have a seatbelt?
Well, we haven't yet determined how we are going to exactly fit all the FAA requirements, and of course, you know, we will absolutely be compliant with every regulation, even though this is never intended to do. You know, be used in the sense of a general aviation aircraft, but I don't believe that's finally been determined.
Mm-hmm. Michael's asking, how did we source the instruments of that era?
Well, it's sort of a mixture. In fact, here, let me just go back to that last slide. This, of course, the collection has a few. Here is a picture of an early airspeed indicator. We don't have any reason to believe it was particularly authentic to the Bleriot, but we felt that it was appropriate. And of course, in general, there aren't very many instruments, so you know, really isn't much to be involved with. He certainly had no altimeter, and you know, other than a few rudimentary engine instruments, which we were looking at putting in just for our own purposes. Instruments were something that really came along later in the aviation history.
Yeah, I suppose I've personally got a little bit of perspective on that, because the past couple of years I've been very slowly building a replica of a World War I aeroplane and using the original plans, and it's been quite interesting trying to track down instruments from the World War I era. They are very, very rare. There is, you know, from time to time I've found a couple on eBay, so they do still come up, and you've got to, you know, just there are some places on the net that I've been able to find, but I think that there tends to be sort of like almost a secret club of people that trade these things, and they often don't change hands for money. They change hands because you've got something that somebody else wants, and they've got something that you want. And as Fred mentioned earlier, that's how we came by the engine in the first place. It came over from France. And that really kick-started this whole project, being able to get an original 1910 engine. I think we felt that, you know, having that engine, as I think was clear from the presentation tonight, just gives you so much more authenticity over it. Gerald, Gerald's asking what is the wing chord, and he thinks it looks like it's about 2 meters.
Oh my goodness! Here, I tell you what. Well. I can go look that up. I think you are about correct. I have the sense of it being on the order of 7 or 8 feet. Very typical of this era. All, you know, the Wright brothers aircraft, in fact, everything in this era used very thin airfoils with very long chords. Surprisingly high camber, but very, very thin airfoils. And it's not hard to imagine why, because they basically were copying bird wings, and you know, that's what they looked like.
Something I forgot to mention actually when we were talking about the flying aircraft was that we were contacted recently by someone who has a 1911 Queens-built Bleriot, and he is hoping to bring that to Oshkosh this summer and to fly it. So that would be something really exciting to look forward to, as well as our hope that we will fly the EAA replica behind a 101-year-old engine. That we're also hoping that there'll be an actual original 100-year-old aeroplane at Oshkosh this summer. We should probably mention as well this year is the centennial of Ovington's airmail flight, right?
Absolutely. And well, and of course there would be quite a airmail activity at the convention as well, because surrounding that.
Yeah. Okay. Now I foolishly lost my question console. It just disappeared on me. Here, I have it back. Sorry, everyone. Did I ask the question, how much does the plane weigh? That was from Dave.
No, it is clearly heavier than all the others, and I have to confess, I don't have the figure right in front of me, but my recollection is it was in the area of 800 pounds. Which is a lot of weight for a 25 horsepower engine, even with a very large wing.
Okay, well...
while you're looking at questions, I might mention, by the way, these are the custom piston rings that we found the only source for in France. Rather unique piston rings, beyond, of course, being metric. They're much thicker than the piston rings that we're used to currently.
Well, I think I'm just reviewing the question list here. I think I did get through them all, and but there was one nice thing that I think we can close with. Neil says felicitations, and I'm probably pronouncing that very badly, but he says that is French for thank you or thanks. So that would be an appropriate name to end on, because Fred, you've given us a great presentation this evening, and thank you for the presentation. Thanks to everyone for being here. As I said earlier, the presentation will be on the video player in about 24 hours time, and we look forward to seeing the aeroplane fly a little bit later in the year. As I said, we are hoping to get it airworthy for AirVenture, and when it does fly, we'll certainly get that video up online so everyone around the world can see it. Oh, and I see Fred has put his email address up there. In fact, as I'm speaking, a very long question has come in here from Richard Whittle, which is a great aviation name, Richard. I don't know if you're related to Sir Frank Whittle, who invented the jet engine. But Richard is saying, on some of the contemporary drawings there seems to be a diagonal brace between the spars on each wing. I don't understand how that brace is connected. Did we brace the wings like that? Also, some drawings seem to show wire bracing within the wing structures, even though it runs through some of the ribs. It seems like either one of these bracing methods would interfere with the wing warping. He'd like to know what we think about that.
Boy, well, of course, again, the Gary Bittner, who is our master designer, would be most appropriate to that. Certainly, it's not unusual to have wire bracing in the wing, and I really wouldn't think that would interfere with the wing warping at all because of the large size. In fact, here, let me just go back quickly, and I'll pull up a picture of that bracing. Hang on a sec. Yeah, this gives you a sense of the chord of the wing and such, and we don't have those braces, but certainly it looks like it would be possible to run wires through the lightning in the ribs.
Here's what I think we should do. We can keep your question, Richard, and we'll get that one to Gary Bittner, who did a wonderful job with the whole project, and It's quite a technical one, but I know Gary will be able to help you out with that. Okay, well, have a good evening, everyone. Thank you for all the questions. Thanks for being here, and we're signing out for the night.